If the meaning of life is the pursuit of happiness, who's happier, Americans or the Dutch? Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David, and in this video I want to talk about the differences between American and Dutch culture and how these differences affect our happiness levels. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is written in the US Declaration of Independence. But when it comes to the actual pursuit of happiness in today's day and age, how does a place like the US compare to the Netherlands? Well, according to the World Happiness Report, generally, Europeans seem to be the happiest people in the world. They're generally at the very top of these rankings, and if you look at the past rankings, the US comes out at number 14, compared to the Netherlands at number 5. And this is based on life evaluation questions such as GDP, social support, corruption, freedom, life expectancy. Take life expectancy as an example. The typical American will live up to around the age of 79, compared to 82 years for the typical Dutch. So on average, the Dutch live a few years longer than the typical American. Now, when you look at general happiness levels for the US, it's fallen over the past few decades, which begs the question why? What happened? And why in general are the Dutch happier than the typical American? Student debt is a big part of American culture, and it doesn't take a scientist to understand that when you have a lot of student debt, you might be more stressed out. And when you're more stressed out, you tend to be less happy. And America has a lot of student debt. In fact, the average American has $37,000 in student debt. Compare that with the Netherlands, where the average Dutch person has around 14,000 euros or $16,000 in student debt. So why is this so? Why does America have so much student debt? Well, it's quite simple. It's extremely expensive to study in the US. If you look at the cost of tuition, if you want to attend a four-year college, a four-year private college in the US, expect to pay around $37,000 in tuition alone per year. It's a bit cheaper if you go to a public school. If you go to a public university, expect to pay anywhere between $10,000 to $30,000 per year in tuition, depending if it's in-state or if you come out of state. And if you go to a state school or community college, it's a lot cheaper. But in general, if you go to a four-year school, university in the US, expect to pay around $100,000 in tuition alone. Now, compare this to the Netherlands, where the average cost of tuition for 1 year, it's only around $2,500. So when you compare a four-year degree in the US, $100,000 compared to a four-year degree in the Netherlands, $10,000, it's a lot cheaper to study in the Netherlands. And I also think this has a big effect on people's careers as well and what people study. You see, when you can afford to change careers in a place like the Netherlands, you have more time to think about what you might enjoy, what you might like to do, what kind of job you might like. I actually know quite a few people who decided to change their careers or do another bachelor's here in the Netherlands because it is affordable. Now, in the US, if you decide to study something like art, history, especially in a place like San Francisco, it's going to be difficult for you to repay that back afterwards when it comes to finding a job, unless you come from a wealthy family. But if you don't, then you really have to consider, okay, how am I going to repay my education? I remember for myself, in my first year of university, I actually decided to study marine biology because I always had a fascination with the oceans. But after the first quarter, I thought, okay, what am I going to do with a marine biology degree? What kind of job would I get? How much debt would I have? And that really stressed me out. So immediately afterwards, I switched to economics because I wanted to go the safe route. And that's very common in the US for people to think about not what they might want to study, but what type of degree would get me a good job to help pay off my student loans. The other thing that I want to add is that when you have an education system like the US where there's a lot of competition that causes a lot of stress and it inhibits the learning. And so there's been so many studies that show when you're stressed out, you learn less. So as a result, I think Dutch students learn a lot more because they're less stressed out as well. And this happiness starts at a very young age. In fact, in childhood, where play, fun, relax is a very big part of Dutch culture. In fact, Dutch kids are the happiest kids in the world. And that's because they believe that having fun, being relaxed, playing is a very pivotal, transformational part of childhood. And we know from research how important childhood is. So if a child learns how to play, how to be relaxed, that can flow into adulthood as well. I remember when I started my master's program here, in the first week we did presentations about our childhoods and our education systems, where we came from. And when I presented, I talked about high school, how stressful it was. SATs, GPAs, extracurriculars to try to get into a good college. I was very stressed out. And when the Dutch students came and did their presentation, they said that life was pretty stress-free up until university. In fact, they didn't even know what stress was until university. They didn't get homework until their teenage years. Actually, kids here, they don't get homework up until their teenage years. So childhood and being a student here is quite relaxed because play is a very big part of Dutch culture. Oh, hey, I should really stop working because it's past 5 p.m. As an American living and working in Europe, it's still a bit difficult for me to shut down because I still have that work mentality that there's always work to be done, that I might fall behind. It's built into the DNA of the American culture, right? It stems from education and it flows into the workplace as well. And as a result, Americans work more on average per week than the typical Dutch. Whereas here, when I first got here, it was weird to see people leaving at 5:30. And for me, I never left that early. If I did, I always felt a bit weird about it because no one else was leaving at 5:30. I usually left normally around 6, 7, sometimes 8 o'clock. And that's because it's built into the work culture in the US, and it's a good and also bad thing as well when you work so much. There's that ambition, that drive to create something amazing, but at the same time, people here value different things as well. They value having a bit more balance in their lives. And take a look at vacation days, for example. In the US, people don't get that many vacation days. Actually, the federal government does not guarantee a minimum paid vacation days per person. It depends on the company, whereas in countries like the Netherlands, we get a minimum of 20 days per year, and it depends on the company. For example, I get 25 days per year, and most people here take them. Most people here take all the vacation days per year, whereas in the US, it's a bit different. It's a bit weird because the US is the country that has the most unused vacation days left at the end of each year, which begs the question why. And I think it has to deal with fear of falling behind, fear of potentially getting replaced, fear of taking time off when no one else around you is taking time off. But here it's the norm, especially during summertime when everyone else is out of the office taking their holidays. So it becomes the norm here for people to take time off to relax, and they actually get the days off to relax as well. Also, take a look at sick leave, for example. In the US, there's no federal mandate that guarantees paid sick leave for an employee. It depends on the state. For example, in California, now you get 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours worked. Now, in a place like the Netherlands, which has, I believe, one of the best policies in the world, if you're sick, you get paid 70% of your salary for 2 years. That's pretty good, right? So as a result of all of these federal policies and also inherently this fear that's built into the American work culture. I think people here in the Netherlands are generally happier because they have more vacation time to spend with their family, friends, themselves. They actually take the vacation time as well. And also, there's not as much fear in this country of getting fired. And actually, having worked in HR now for 2 years, I can say that for employees here, it's actually really hard for them to get fired. Whereas in the US, getting fired, that's a real thing. Which leads me to talk about a very important point I want to make about happiness. The difference between standing out in the US versus standing in or being average in the Netherlands. Because in the US, we grow up thinking that we're the best, that we want to be the best that we can be. We want to stand out by going to a good school, getting a good job. We want to stand out by the clothes that we wear, the car that we drive, the people that we hang out with. It's really about standing out, being unique. Compare that with the Netherlands, where it's the exact opposite. It's about standing in. It's about being the same. There's a Dutch saying that goes something like, act normal, then you're crazy enough. Because being the same, being average, that's built into society here. Take a look at the clothes people wear. I think people dress quite fashionably here, but they also dress quite similarly as well. Take a look at the food. It doesn't really stand out. Take a look at the buildings. They kind of look the same as well. The weather's kind of the same as well. Most days of the year, it's rainy, gloomy, cloudy. People bike here, and when people bike in public, when they dress the same, the buildings look the same. Everything's really the same. But there's a beauty in that because you're not comparing yourself as much. You have less comparison points. And when you're comparing yourself less, then you become happier. Because in the US, the culture is really about comparing yourself to other people. That's essentially the rat race. It's running on this treadmill where nothing is ever enough. Compare that to the Netherlands where acting normal, then you're crazy enough. Well, I want to add a few more things to say about this rat race that's inherent in all parts of the world, but especially the US. This rat race, well, it's a mindset. It's this competition for power, for wealth. And when I first came here, what I noticed was, at least from my American perspective, was that people weren't very ambitious in the workplace. And then I met this friend from Amsterdam. He told me that people here aren't very ambitious when it comes to work because of how the system's built here. The higher up that they go, the more taxes they have to pay. And also, you don't gain as much money when you go up the ladder as compared to the US. And so now I understand why people don't go and kill themselves to try to climb up the corporate ladder because they get taxed more. Also, they don't earn that much more because the difference between a normal employee here and, say, the CEO, it's not as much as, say, the US, where the gap is a lot bigger, where someone could be earning $50,000 in the US and the CEO could be making $50 million. So really, from a professional point of view, there's really no big incentive because how the system is structured here, it favors being average, right? You can live a pretty high quality of life just being average. And when you don't have that stress to climb up the corporate ladder, and when you don't see people around you with that same level of ambition, then you're less stressed and you're a lot happier as well. Well, let's talk about healthcare. In a study of 11 of the highest income countries around the world, they compared the healthcare systems of these countries. Which countries had the best systems? Which countries had the worst healthcare systems? And the US came in last place. Norway and the Netherlands came in at 1 and 2. So why is this so? Well, the US has always had a reputation, a bad reputation when it comes to healthcare. Not everyone in the US has healthcare coverage. Not everyone has universal healthcare coverage. 92% of the US population has healthcare coverage, leaving 8%. But 8% of a big population, that's a big number. Whereas in a country like the Netherlands, almost 100% of people living in this country have healthcare. Because it's required by law to have at least a basic plan of healthcare. And let's be honest, healthcare in the US is expensive. It's really expensive. For example, when you look at deductibles, the amount that each person has to pay out of pocket before healthcare kicks in the US, it's $1,700 per person. In a place like the Netherlands, it's around 400 euros. So that's a big difference, the amount that each person has to pay out of pocket in the US as compared to the Netherlands. And I'm sure we've heard of these horror stories of people in the US paying $600 for a Band-Aid, $25,000 for an MRI. It's extravagant, these prices people pay when they don't have insurance or when they don't have the proper insurance as well. So just like education, the healthcare system in the US, it's sort of like a business to make money. And as a result, I believe generally people living in a country like the Netherlands are generally happier because they have access to affordable healthcare. They're not worried about paying an extravagant sum for an operation or for something small as well. So here's a story about myself. When I first arrived in this country, the Netherlands, I was walking in the park and I got bit by a dog, by a pit bull on the wrist. And there was some blood, and luckily there were some police officers nearby. They told me to go to the hospital nearby, the ER. And immediately in my mind, I thought, how much money is this going to cost to go to the ER just to get a shot? Because in the US, I remember things are really expensive even if you do have healthcare. And so I was hesitant in going to the ER. But eventually, because it was important that I needed to get a shot within 2 days, I went to the ER and the ER redirected me to a nearby general practitioner and I got my shot and it was free. It was covered by my healthcare. But I just had this fear in my head, how much would it cost me even though I had healthcare? So cycling is a big part of Dutch culture, and that's a big reason why Dutch people are a lot healthier than Americans, because here everyone cycles, everyone walks. There's actually more bicycles than humans here. And the infrastructure here is built for cycling, so when you walk everywhere and you cycle everywhere, you tend to be healthier compared to the typical American who spends her time driving, stuck in a car. I remember when I lived in LA, I had a local supermarket 2 blocks away, but I would drive there because that's what people do in LA. They drive everywhere. And so that is a big difference between the US and the Netherlands. People here are healthier because they cycle, they walk everywhere compared to Americans who drive everywhere. I can't believe it took me 30 minutes just to get a burger from McDonald's. That's not really fast food here in the Netherlands, but actually, that's the point. There's not as many temptations, and fast food here is not really fast food compared to the US. And I remember when I lived in the US, in LA, things were open late at night. It was extremely convenient, and I would get tacos late at night. I would drive to Del Taco, get 10 tacos, and finish that in 30 minutes. That became a common thing, a very easy thing to do. And you can see why Americans are so obese. They're actually the most obese country in the OECD countries, the wealthy countries. And it's because there's so much fast food, things are so convenient, and they're open 24/7 in many places as well. Compared to the Netherlands here, things aren't open 24/7. You don't have as many temptations to go get fast food late at night. And when you do have that craving, and it's cold and it's raining outside, you don't even want to go outside. So that's really a simple formula, right? For being healthy, for being happy. When you don't have as many temptations, you don't go eat bad food, and you add in cycling and walking, and that's really that simple formula for fitness, for good health. And when you have good health, then you become happier. Sounds simple, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think we as Americans can learn a thing or two from the Dutch when it comes to this pursuit of happiness. But I'm not saying that Americans should be exactly like the Dutch. No, I don't think so. There's a reason why America is the most powerful country in the world with so many innovative solutions. But what if we toned it down a bit? Can we still achieve the same with a happier workforce, happier kids? Well, the studies seem to say so, linking happiness with more productivity and achievements as well. But I don't know, we'll see. These are my opinions as a Californian living, studying, and working in the Netherlands for about 3 years now. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? Thank you so much for staying until the very end. I wish you well, I wish you happiness, and I hope you take care.